Welcome to the Storytellers, the radio show and podcast that features those who choose to leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I'm your host, Grace Sammon. I look forward to our time together today. Now, let's meet our storyteller. Hello, thank you for being with us today on the Storytellers. Meredith R. Stoddard writes folklore-inspired fiction from her she shed in Virginia. She studied literature and folklore at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Prior to that, she was a corporate trainer and an instructional designer. Her love of storytelling was earned right at her grandmother's kitchen table, where stories were told for years and years. She also advocates for the use of traditional fibers and also the Scottish Gaelic language. Meredith Stoddard, thank you for joining me at the microphone today.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace. I love your show. I'm excited.
Well, thank you. And we're going to talk about so many things. But one of the things I wanted to start with is really our path to publishing and how publishing has changed so much in the last 18 months. You and I, full disclosure, you and I have never met.
We've
never met in real life. This is actually our first one-on-one conversation. Mm-hmm. Yet, we've been working together for almost a year on the Instagram and Facebook groups, Bookish Road Trip, where we collaborate constantly.
Very true.
Talk about how, from the beginning of your writing process to today, how your publishing world has changed.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the first when I first started writing the River Maiden, the first book in my series in 1999, the year I got married. So it's been 22 years that since I started writing that first book, and going to now. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot in my life that has changed, but it's the publishing industry altogether, has changed so much. I mean, when I went into writing the River Maiden, I was, I thought I'm going to finish this book someday, and it's gonna get queried forever, and because it's kind of a genre bender, it's a little bit fantasy, it's a little bit women's fiction, it's and so it's not an easy fit. So I expected to be trying to find a home for it for a long time. And then shortly, like around the time I was finishing it, I went to a James River Writers Conference. We know some other friends who are James River Writers members. It's a great organization. And there was an agent there who was talking about self-publishing and talking about the fact that as long as you are committed to putting out the most quality product that you can, that you can be successful. In fact, the path to profitability is much shorter because you don't have as many hands in the pot, so to speak. And in listening to her talk about it, I was kind of inspired and thinking, you know what, this is the time for this book, because at the time the Outlander TV series was fixing to come out, and this sort of has that sort of Scottish North Carolina connection, so it fit very well with what was going on in pop culture at the time, and I didn't want to spend another 2 years trying to find an agent and querying things like that. And so that that kind of talk was like, it kind of inspired me to just push forth and find an editor and, make that investment so that I could put out a quality book, but not wait through so much of the traditional publishing process. And that's what I did. So I found a terrific editor and, and did that. And that's what got the ball rolling.
And that's really changed dramatically too over the time since you wrote the River Maiden. And, it used to be, oh, I'm self-published. And now the whole indie publish world is so much more respected, and you have these numbers of years behind you, and I think that shows in the quality of your work. So
Yeah,
let's jump right back. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Well, I was just going to say that I think that indie publishing has become far more accepted. I think that the more indie published books that are of a good quality are out there, readers don't look at the copyright page. Like, they don't look at who published the book. They usually look at, is it a good book? Does this blurb, excite me? Does it make me interested to read more?
And nobody ever asks us who our publisher are. Maybe in
exactly.
our author circles, we'll say, "Oh, how does that work for you? Do you like your publisher?" But nobody else has ever asked me,
Very
whether
true.
it's an interview or whatever. It just doesn't come up. So I agree with you. But now let's jump right into the River Maiden.
Okay.
In our exchange in preparation for today, I said, "Where would you like to start?" Because we are going to talk about your series. But I think you said something along the lines, if they read the River Maiden, they're going to be hooked. And I was hooked.
Oh, good.
Totally. And you talked about genres, and it's not normally a genre I would navigate to. Yes, the women's fiction, yes, historical, but not necessarily the folklore. So I want to talk about all of those things. But you had me at hello, which is always what any author wants. So would you gift us with just the first 4 paragraphs of your book?
Absolutely. I, especially with the first 3 books, I like to start with kind of a little intro sort of thoughts. And this is the beginning of the River Maiden. Morag McAlpin died when she was 6 years old, although death can be a relative term. It's sprinkled throughout our everyday language like so much cinnamon on top of our morning coffee. When we're excited, we say, I could just die. We get mortified when we're embarrassed. When kids know they're in trouble, they say, my parents are going to kill me. And of course, there is the petit mort of sexual satisfaction. Our pop culture is full of sentient ghosts, vampires, and zombies who interact with the world even after death. Our most prominent religions are based on what happens after we die. Hindus and Buddhists espouse reincarnation. Islam promises a heaven of gardens with rivers running through it. Mormons even allow you to convert relatives after they've died. Christianity is based on the idea that death is only a temporary condition. And like Jesus, believers will all be resurrected when the rapture comes. We do our best to change death from a period or even an exclamation point at the end of life into a comma or a semicolon. Whether little Morag's heart actually stopped on that morning in the spring of 1976 is debatable. But there is no doubt that the girl who woke up gasping for breath, cradled in her grandmother's arms that day, was not the same girl who had been picking flowers in the woods just that morning, or laughing with her mother as she got ready for her bath. In that moment, when she stared shivering over her grandmother's shoulder at the limp form of her mother on the floor, the ground shifted beneath her feet, and the very sky above her changed color. Nothing was ever the same. And for a child as young as 6, the only solution was to become a different person. That was the day that Morag became Sarah, and Sarah put away childish things like fairy tales.
Brava.
Thank you.
There is so much in those 4 paragraphs that speaks to the quality of your writing. I love the as sprinkled as like cinnamon on our coffee. The amount of research that you had to do to get to that place of just the quick synopsis of death from all those religious points of view. Where does that come from for you?
I am just always curious. I mean, and as far as the religion goes, at the same time that I was studying folklore and literature at Carolina, I took enough classes to get a minor in religion, but couldn't let some of those folklore and religion classes do double duty. So I absorbed a lot and studied a lot. But I'm just always curious, and I'm one of those folks that gets that sort of one little nugget, and it makes me curious, and I'll just drill down on it until I've found out almost everything I can. So
that comes through beautifully in your writing. in terms of not only those little nuggets, which I always cherish in any book, but the flavor of your writing. One of the things you taught me in The River Maiden was about mouth music, something I had never heard about.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Mouth music is a kind of a way of singing in Scottish Gaelic that is very percussive. It's very quick. It's meant to sort of double as a musical instrument. Fiddle players in Cape Breton are actually, it's pretty common for people to say that if you can't sing mouth music, you can't play the fiddle because they're so intertwined and they're so similar to each other. So it's just a terrific thing to listen to. There are some great mouth music performers out there. Julie Fallis is one of them. She's in Celtic Women. Mary Jane Lamond is a really good one from Cape Breton. So it's fun to listen to.
Can you do mouth music?
A little bit.
Have
to. A little bit. I don't usually sing in public, but yeah, it's fun. It's fun to sing if you like singing.
I loved that from just those first 4 paragraphs, but also as I read the rest of your book. There's so many times where you really can't tell the difference between what's true and what's fantasy. How do you strike that balance in your work?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as fantasy for people who don't normally read fantasy. Like it's not, it's a lot more Susanna Kearsley than it is George R.R. Martin. There's a little bit of fantasy that weaves in there, and I don't know, there's kind of the ultimate question for me as when I say that I write folklore inspired fiction is with everything in folklore starts with some bit of truth, right? There's always some little grain of history or, just life lessons that folklore is, different folktales are built around. And so I'm always thinking about, well, where is that truth? Where is that, where does that come from? And in some cases, it's easy. Like you have things like the Ballad of Frankie Silvers. Well, you can go back and look at court records about Frankie Silvers and what happened to her and all of that. But then there are others that, that are older, and it's a little harder to tease out where the truth is. And so when I'm writing these things and I'm talking about folklore, a lot of it is kind of trying to figure out where that grain of truth is and weave that back into this sort of modern story about this woman who, it starts in the 1990s, but as you probably noticed, it really starts long before that.
Yes. So do you want to tell us more about the series and also about why do you write a series? Is it harder, easier?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are things about writing a series that is easier because it gives you the opportunity to really dive deep into the main characters in the series. And I love it. Like I know Sarah and Dermot inside out, and I get to spend so much time with them. But there are other, pitfalls to it because I sort of planned out this big, long series, and there are other things that I'd like to write too. I have another manuscript that's in revision right now that I'm just going to I'm slow walking it because I'm trying to focus on the series because my readers want to know what happens next in the series, which is the best, but it's also the worst because it makes me feel like I'm not writing fast always. But the inspiration for the series really is the idea, and it's the Once and Future series. It's the idea that, King Arthur is supposed to be the once and future king. And what would happen if the future part of that happened now? And what would that look like? And how would that play out in modern times? And that was sort of my jumping off point. And because I do like women's fiction, and some of that was about what would happen to the previous generation. What if a modern woman was suddenly told, hey, you're going to be the mother of, this king, and what would that do to her life and how would that look? And so that's kind of where this sort of jumped out and started the ball rolling, so to speak. And it's been an interesting adventure, I think, so far. And I've tried to weave in Arthurian legend, Scottish folklore, Appalachian folklore, just all of the things that I think would sort of feed into what makes what makes us as a society. So.
And you do such a great job of that. I haven't gotten to the other ones in the series, but I can't wait. When you write your series, I've seen pictures of your she shed, which you are in at the moment,
Yep.
and you have everything mapped out. Talk about your writing process, please, and tell people about your she shed. Because I'm very jealous. I have lots of spaces to write, but I do not have a she shed.
I love my shed. It's a little bit cold in the mornings because I don't heat it at night when I'm not in here. But so this time of year can be a little difficult, but I love it most of the time. It's a great space for mapping that stuff out, and that's why I have the blackboard behind me. Yeah, as far as my writing process goes, I am a plotter, and so I will lay out. I'm a big fan of Save the Cat, and Save the Cat writes a novel. And so I'll lay out my beat sheets, and then kind of break that down into scenes that will get me through all of that. And I'm sure that's probably goes back to all the time I spent writing nonfiction in the corporate world. I'm used to outlining. I like to have a roadmap. I also have a tendency to get interrupted as I'm writing because I'm a mom, and things happen. And so having that roadmap helps me get back on task after getting interrupted. And so it helps me be more productive. I have written without an outline before. If you read the next book in the series, Cauldron, that the part of it that is all about Sarah's mother, I wrote. That was my NaNoWriMo project. I just sat down and wrote it out. And that works. It's okay. But I knew that part was going to end up getting broken up and woven in with other things. So but for the most part, I have to have that roadmap. It keeps me.
I'm the same way. I need to, in education circles, we talk about starting with the end in mind. We have to know where we're going to be, or we're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And your ending to River Maiden is also quite spine tingling. Do you know the end in your series?
Do I know the end of the whole series?
No. Do you know the end of each of the books? Or do you deliberately manipulate it so that is the jumping off point for the next book?
Yes and no. I think when I originally started writing The River Maiden, I did not. Like, I wrote a completely different ending. And it was okay because at the time that I wrote the original ending, I thought I was going to try to be traditionally published. And I knew that I could maybe get a publisher to bite on the first book, but not on like a giant series. So I was trying to make the first book, self-contained. And then when I decided to self-publish, the last chapter sells the next book when you're writing a series. Yeah. And so I kind of pulled that in and thought, okay, this will be nice and electrifying and hopefully make people want to move on to the next book. So,
well, you do a good job of that, Meredith. One of the things in your bio struck me, because you and I have similar backgrounds in that we've both been corporate trainers. Mm-hmm. I did not know I wanted to be a storyteller. I certainly did lots of writing throughout my career. But your bio says you always knew you wanted to be a storyteller. What did that mean to you?
Well, I have always, my parents will even tell you, and they love to embarrass me with stories about when I was a kid and used to make up stories. Like, mm-hmm. I would make up and act out whole, stories and lives and things when I was younger, even before I, knew how to read. And so I've kind of always had that. And when I was young, I spent so much time. My grandmother is kind of the memory keeper of our family, and we're a pretty big family in a pretty small town in North Carolina. So She knows kind of everybody, and taught most of them in Sunday school,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
loves to tell stories. And so I spent years and years and years, like during the summer, my folks would just pack my brother and I off to my grandparents' house for 2 weeks as soon as school got out, and because I'm sure they needed a break.
Good plan on your parents' part, yes.
Yeah. And we would spend the summers just listening to them, and talking about it. And she would tell me all the old family legends from generations back, and stories about people in the town and stuff like that. So it was, I just got used to living like that, and thinking about it and trying to see the lessons in all of those. So even when I was a corporate trainer, and I'm sure this has probably been your experience as well, some of the most effective classes are the ones where you're taking them through a narrative process. Like, this is the task I'm trying to teach you. I'm going to tell you this story that's going to get you through this task. And that helps implant those, that new knowledge in people's minds. So I find it very valuable. And marketers will tell you the same thing. If you can get people hooked on a story, then that's going to make them more attached to what you're trying to do, whatever that is.
So you've also brought in not only your corporate knowledge of writing and getting across the message, but also the marketing of it.
Yes. Well, I trained salespeople predominantly when I was a corporate trainer. So that's definitely part of it. And I find also that the project management aspect of, I used to create whole new hire curriculums when I was training, and that whole, the management of getting all of the information and gathering it and editing it, and going from start to actually teaching classes was something that I got used to, and that's carried over because I'll have dates every time I sit down to write a book. Now, I don't always stick to these deadlines, but I always give myself deadlines, like this is the milestone that I should be at on this date, and so on. Doesn't always work that way because life happens.
But you've answered one of my big questions, because you are one of the hardest working and most prolific authors that I've had the opportunity to meet. And I guess the answer is time management, because I don't know how you do all that you do. You manage the Instagram account for Bookish Road Trip. You're very active on your own.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a variety. Talk to us just for a minute before we begin to close. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your fiber arts, because you are the only person I know who owns a spinning wheel, and maybe more than one.
Well, my the same grandmother who sparked my love of storytelling, my grandfather was a weaver. Their families both worked in textile mills in North Carolina, in the Piedmont area of North Carolina, and I just kind of got hooked on that. After most of the mills closed down in the 50s and 60s, my grandfather went to NC State and got a job working in the School of Textiles. And there's Fergus.
We love your dog.
Yeah, he's a sweetie, but he's loud. Got hooked on just all kinds of fiber arts, so knitting, crocheting, all of that stuff. And I love spinning my own yarn. And my grandfather, when he was at State, he used to teach people how to use the spinners and spin yarn. And he would bring that excess home, which we would all sort of share around the family, because we're all crocheters or knitters or whatever. And so I still have yarn that my grandfather and students at NC State spun, ages ago. But yeah, so I
wonderful.
Spinning your own yarn is a wonderful meditative process, because it's just a very simple task, but it's really nice, and it's tactile. It's a great way to relax.
Well, I wish I knew you when I was writing my book, because I have this very short section where they are shearing sheep and llamas and making wool, and I could have just called you up and you could have given me the shortcut to that research of how does this all work. So as we begin to close, I always like to ask our guests, what's something quirky about you that people might not normally know?
Oh gosh. That's tough. I think I am a language nerd. Like I love learning languages, and I for the series I learned Gaelic, which I would not call myself fluent by any means, but I enjoyed kind of getting into the mechanics of how the language works and stuff like that. And I have a hard time on Duolingo keeping up with all the different languages that I have, because I have Scottish Gaelic and Irish and Welsh and Spanish, which I have been studying for years and years. So it's just yeah, that's the thing. I'm a nerd for language.
That's great. And I love that app, Duolingo. I use it myself.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just make sure people know where to find you. I know, tell us about where they can find you and follow you, because you're a delight.
MeredithStoddard.com is my website. And of course, as you mentioned, I'm always on Instagram at MRStoddard, and Twitter also at M_R_Stoddard. And yeah, I love talking with folks. So if folks read my any of my books, and by the way, the River Maiden is only 99 cents at most ebook retailers, so folks can pick it up anytime. But yeah, anybody who wants to read it and wants to talk, I'm always happy to interact with readers.
Well, Meredith, thank you for being such a great storyteller. This has been an episode of The Storytellers, copyrighted by Authors on the Air, Global Radio Network, and Grace Sammon. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Grace. It's been lovely.
That concludes this episode of The Storytellers. I'm so glad you could be part of the story today. I hope you share the stories, tell your own, and come back for another episode, because when our stories are told, everything changes. I'm Grace Sammon.